Hey everyone, making this week's video for Ecclesiastes 1:12 through the end of 2, all of chapter 2. So, yeah, one thing to note right off the bat is that you're still kind of answering that question from 1:3. What does a man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? I don't know if that's the thesis of the book, but it kind of feels like it to me. Um, it's this question: what can you gain for all your toil under the sun? And I think we're continuing to answer that here. So jumping right in, let's take 12 to 18 first in chapter 1. Now I think this section can best be understood in 3 verse increments. 2 verses of kind of like statements, and then there's a proverb in both 15 and 18, and the proverb is kind of the key to understanding them. So let's take the first one first. In 12 to 15, what he's doing is that he is trying to, he's trying to seek out, um, he's trying to understand the world through wisdom. Like he's trying to understand, grasp the world, what's happening in the world. Yeah, like search out by wisdom all that is done under the sun. And what he finds, you can see there. Yeah, it's a vanity. It's striving after the wind, right? And then the proverb says, what is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. And what he's kind of trying to say is that manipulating the world is hevel. He is, like he's basically saying you need to accept things the way they come to you. What is crooked is crooked. What is lacking is lacking. That's kind of what he's trying to say here. Things are the way they are. We need to accept things in that way. Now, we're not saying just like there's evil in the world, accept it, whatever. But I think the point will be made clear as we go through this study. But what we can say that he's saying here is things are the way they are, and to understand them, to manipulate them is hevel. Okay, so the next section, he's going to look at wisdom itself. Um, he's saying, he's just looked at the world through the lens of wisdom. Now he's going to look at wisdom itself. Now I want to be careful here. He's not going to say ultimately that wisdom is useless. He's going to say wisdom is better than folly across the whole book. But and to that end, he's using wisdom here to come to true conclusions. So just understand that. But he's saying that wisdom is not an end in itself or a means of overcoming hevel. Okay, it's like wisdom for wisdom's sake is not a means of finding gain in this life, and that in itself shows us the pervasiveness of hevel. That's what he means. And much wisdom is much vexation. He who increases knowledge increases sorrow. I think you can probably relate to this little proverb here. So that's the gist of what's happening here. I like this quote by Proven. It is often those who have pursued wisdom and knowledge most relentlessly and have probed reality most deeply who understand most fully just how limited still is our understanding of the quest. I feel like this is true. The more I learn about anything, the farther I feel from it. Especially in like the field of theology, I feel like maybe like 7-8 years ago, I was more sure of what I knew than what I know now, even though I feel like I know more now than I did 7-8 years ago. It's like the closer I get to God, the bigger I feel like he is. I feel like it's kind of what's happening here. So, have some questions here asking you to consider, how you've experienced that in your life. And then in First Corinthians, it's really interesting. I'm going to flip over here. He talks about wisdom in First Corinthians. Let's see, I have you looking at 18 to 21. About, it says, who is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where's the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. I think that what Paul is pointing out here is the ultimate, what am I trying to say? that wisdom cannot gain everything, especially the gospel. It's through the foolishness of the cross. It's through only God through God's revelation. It's not through that we are saved. It's not through our wisdom. It's not through how smart we are or how much we've achieved. It is the foolishness of the cross that we would die to find life. That kind of seems anti-wisdom in terms of how we usually think about what wisdom is in this world. So I just want you to wrestle a little bit with what is the proper place for wisdom and knowledge. Obviously, there is a place for it. God has given us minds. He tells us to love Him with all our heart, soul, mind, strength. So, what is the place for wisdom if it's not what He's getting at here? I think that'll become more clear. By the way, the 24 to 26 in chapter 2, that ties up this whole thing. But we have to wrestle along as we go. Okay, so oh no, I'm yawning again. Maybe videos make me tired. I don't know. Okay, so chapter 2, I have you taking a big hunk here in verses 1 to 12. And in these verses, there's going to be a lot happening here. He's going to be seeking out kind of this meaning, value, trying to answer this question of gain in three different areas: pleasure, work, and profit. There's some big questions that arise in this section, especially in the first one about drinking wine. I'm not going to get into it here because I've written a note in the video. Or I'm sorry, I've written a note in the note section, but it's confusing. Oh man, I never had this yawning problem before. I just watched the basketball game. Maybe I'm tired. I'll say briefly that this is a tough issue, and I just want to say I don't think that we should read everything that the teacher does as being like perfect or great. Like, it's a little easier to understand with the building projects. Like, is it virtuous that he seeks out all these building projects and tries to make, what does he say here? Uh, oh gosh, I'm in First Corinthians. That's not going to help me. Let me go back to Ecclesiastes. In chapter 2, yeah, here we go. He says, I made great works and all these things. I planted parks and gardens. I made myself pools. Like, is that virtuous? I don't think we should need to see that everything he does is perfect and right. I think that what he's showing us is a lot that he's sought out some things that are ultimately not what our design is in life, or as ends in and of themselves, and he's found them to be lacking. Anyway, read my note. Let me know if you want to talk about that more. I know that's a bit of a confusing one. So, so I encourage you to talk through that. You got those three sections: pleasure, work, and profit. And I think what we experience a lot of times, if you seek these things out, like if you were to seek a meaningful life and pleasure or work or profit, we always want more. We are never satisfied by these things. And how the teacher talks here often, it is almost always at odds with how people usually talk about it, especially in terms of work or profit. Like, I mean, I feel like our world is so focused on achieving and gaining and climbing the ladder that what the teacher is saying here is very countercultural. So in the end, in 11 and 12, or yeah, or sorry, 10 and 11, I might have overlapped here. I have you reading. Yeah. So in 10 and 11, his takeaway is that he finds pleasure in the toil itself, and that's a little hint of what's coming at the end. And that pleasure in the toil was the reward in and of itself. But then he looked at all that he'd done, and he saw that it was vanity and that there was nothing to be gained. So back again to that question in 1:3, what does a man gain? And he's saying nothing. Okay, so on to the next section, 12 to 16. He's going to back up here. He's going to consider wisdom and folly again. But especially here, what he's going to do is he's going to see that he's going to die. He's coming to terms with his own mortality. And he's like, man, all this is happening and someone is going to take over this stuff. And my fate, even though I'm wise, is the same fate as the fool. And what do we gain in the end? It's a really important thing to think about. So let me talk through some of these questions here. The first question: given what the teacher says about wisdom in chapter one, what value does he see in it here? Um, Again, what I want you to understand is that he's not saying wisdom is bad. Wisdom is good. But if wisdom is the way you are measuring a well lived life or a successful life, to be wise in of yourself, you are chasing the wind. It is not, and it's unachievable. It's unsatisfying. You will never gain enough wisdom to come out on top. And even if you do, he's saying here, we all die in the end. It's a nice uplifting message. Um, so that's kind of what he's saying here. It's not that there's no value. It's that it's not an end it's not an end of itself, or I'm sorry, it's not a means to a greater end. To be wise is an end of itself, just the pleasure of wisdom and seeking knowledge. That in and of itself is the goal, not to gain something greater by that wisdom. Now, I think embracing the reality of death is really important here. You can see that it shifts his perspective to embrace the reality of death. We don't live in a world, except for maybe kind of recently with COVID, especially in the United States, where we face um, death very often. Oh my goodness. Don't worry, I will take care of this yawning. I don't know if I will or not. Next week, uh, I'm sorry, not next week. I'm getting ahead of my in my thoughts. We're gonna next in these next verses here in Isaiah 22, 12 to 13, and 1 Corinthians 15, you're gonna see people facing death, and you're gonna see them saying, like, well, we're gonna die, so might as well have fun while we're here. But we don't ever really have to face death very often. Except for maybe our grandparents die, maybe sometimes there's a death, but across history, people have faced death more than us, and it is actually really important for us to face the reality of death. Now, the perspective of, well, we're going to die, so let's just have fun while we're here, that is still a pervasive attitude. But what you're going to see in First Corinthians is that Paul's view of the resurrection changes the way he thinks about that. More specifically, it leads him to see, like, no, it's not just like we die and there's nothing, but the fact that we have abundant life and eternal life. Death does measure us in the way we think about our life, but it doesn't lead us to say, well, let's just eat, drink, and be merry. Rather, say, let's live a God fearing, a God pleasing life now, that we might inherit eternal life, because there's more to be had. There's good work to be done here that will have an impact on eternity. And it's very different from the passage in Isaiah where they're saying, like, death is coming, eat, drink, and be merry. The resurrection changes everything. Okay, moving along to the next section, 17 to 23. Lost track of my. Right, so he hates his life. This is a very depressing section. He gets really down on himself. And he's like looking back on his life and he's like, man, I just worked my life away. I worked all this time away. And what do I have to gain for it? I think this is a nice kind of warning for us. I don't know about you, but I can be a workaholic. And I this section is a reminder to me of, like, man, it is not God's design for me to work myself to death, nor is it helpful in the end. Um, I think that it's really important to consider, like, okay, first of all, would you call yourself a workaholic? A lot of people say they are, but my question is, why? What is your hope? Is it to get a better grade? Is it to get a job? Like, what are you chasing in your workaholicism? Where we're into on this Bible study is like, okay, how do we honor our God-given limits? I say it right there. What would it look like for you to honor your limits? And in the end, we're going to give specific charge to that end. Okay, now finally, we've come to the solution of the Bible study, and we're going to hear this kind of language throughout Ecclesiastes. But basically, he's going to say the kind of life that is well lived in the sight of God is to eat and drink and find enjoyment in your toil. Um, and then he says, "This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from Him, who can eat or have enjoyment?" What he's saying here is, you often we think of life as a means to some other end, or we think of our the good gifts from God as a means to some greater end. And when we do that, we're missing the point. He's flipping our ideas of success and meaning on their head by saying, no, like your life is the reward. Like that you are alive is a gift from God. The good things He has for you are the gift from God, and we ought to just enjoy them. Now, it might seem odd for us to think of things like enjoyment and pleasure and enjoying work as something that's Christian, because it might seem kind of worldly, like to think of like enjoyment as some kind of good goal, but it kind of is. It is, because God is the one, like he says here, apart from God, who can eat or have enjoyment? So it really is a Christian thing to understand, like, okay, I have this life, I'm going to enjoy it and appreciate it and not think of it as a means to some other end. Now, I think it's important to say that you're like, wait, didn't we say eat, drink, and be merry wasn't a good thing? Yes, we did. I don't know. I think the important difference here is that when you say eat, drink, and be merry with no sense of like reverence toward God, I think you know what that looks like. But I think that what this is saying, like this kind of eat, drink, and find enjoyment, is in the sight of God. Yes, we want to live a God honoring life, but we don't, like, at the same time, we're enjoying our life for what it is, right? The other Drink and Be Merry has this sense of kind of like a debauchery feel to it. This is just kind of like accepting the things God has given us. So there's a little bit of different feeling there. So let's see. I've said all this, challenging how to view a good life. Doo-doo-doo. And yeah, just I hope you consider, what does it look like to live this out, rather than pushing yourself and using your life as a means to an end and working to gain some never achievable goal, always chasing the wind. What would it look like to live out these verses? And that's where we kind of end here. I hope this statement at the end is challenging to you, and I hope you'll take up one of these challenges this week, to honor your God-given limits, or simply to seek out some kind of enjoyment, knowing that God has given that to you this week. I'm going fast. There's so much material. These videos might be a little bit longer because there's a lot to explain and talk about. Please let me know if you want to chat more. I've skimmed over a couple things. Happy to talk. Hope you guys have a good week. See you soon.